by Tanya Ward, who is CEO of the Children's Rights Alliance. Tanya, I mean, when you hear first-person testimony like that, you really see just how dreadful an experience many women have been put through. At this point, we've had calls for an inquiry from Archbishop Dermot Martin and others. What do we need to know?
Well, I think from the historical information that's available and in the public domain, it would seem there seem to be very high levels of infant mortality. So at the very outset, we need to look at that particular question. We'd also argue in the Alliance that we need to look at the potential legality of those adoptions that took place, as well as legality of the burial site where the children were placed.
All right, so there's lots of, I mean, well, we heard Marion there speaking about her own adoption. She would have said it was a forced illegal adoption. I mean, from what you're hearing, is that quite a common description from the women who were in these homes of how their babies came to be adopted?
Don't necessarily think it's a common description, but it seems to have happened, and there seems to be enough personal testimonies from people and enough documentation in the public domain to suggest that some adoptions were actually forced and illegal.
OK, so forced illegal adoption is one issue that needs to be looked into. When it comes to infant mortality, I mean, we've had the discovery of the bodies in a septic tank in Tuam. What questions need to be answered there? You know, over the weekend, a lot of people have been saying, well, are we sure that they came from the mother and baby home? Could they be famine bodies? You know, what do you want to know there?
Well, I think the burial side, it's very complex because historians are saying there could be lots of different people buried there. I think moving back to what's, in terms of the children that were cared for in the home, we need to look at the care regime that was actually in place to produce such a high level of infant mortality. There's something wrong, I suppose, in terms of how in Ireland we've treated children who were born outside wedlock and children who are experiencing poverty. They're the key questions I think that are going to be looked at. This is the same Ireland that was looked at by the Ferrens report, the Murphy report, by the Ryan report, and this is one of those last areas that we need to deliver some form of closure to the people who went through those homes.
And on that issue, I mean, you know, we did an Amnesty report on this in 2011, hiding in plain sight. Why has it taken us, or is it taking us so long to address the issues raised by the treatment of women in these homes?
Well, the Magdalen laundries were treated in a similar vein, and the suggestion at the time was that these were private institutions that weren't in control of the state. But remember, they were actually part of the response to infanticide that would have been taking place in the 18th century and 19th century. There was a 1908 Act in operation. It was called the Children's Charter, and that was part of the response to infanticide. There was also the Irish Constitution that came into force in 1937, and since the 1940s, the courts started to hold that children who were described as illegitimate, it was a legal concept at the time, did have the same natural rights as other children. So that's the legal basis for an inquiry of this nature.
Right, and just to go back to infanticide, I mean, prior to the legislation change, that was maybe not a common, but it was a normal enough response to the birth of an illegitimate child.
It was certainly a problem. It was certainly a problem, and it was passed obviously by Houses of Parliament. It was part of the response to it.
And so, Tanya, what are you calling for at this point? What should happen now?
You know, I think the government's interdepartmental review is very important and very necessary. It seems to be there's other information that they are able to, that's in their purview, that they're able to establish some of the facts of what happened. But I think at the very least there seems to have been an issue around child neglect and the childcare regime that was in place. Perhaps those deaths of those children were preventable at the time. We need to look at that.
Will we be able to get that information? I mean, do you believe those records exist, or that we will be able to come to some proper conclusions here?
It seems to be, but there's also lots of people around who can give personal testimonies. Yeah. You know, so a lot of those children, you know, that went through the homes are still alive. A lot of the mothers, you can see, are still around as well. And you know, the nuts and bolts of the Ryan Commission, the Murphy Commission, it was personal testimony as well. It wasn't just based on historical records. So there is enough there, I think, to establish a true reflection.
That's quite a large-scale inquiry you're talking about then.
Well, if you had specific questions, I mean, the Ryan Commission was a big inquiry. I think this would be more in line with the Murphy Commission.
Right. OK, well, listen, Tanya Ward, thank you very much indeed for coming into us this morning.
OK.